I'm going to introduce our guest briefly. Jim Verhulst is the Deputy Editor of Editorials of the Tampa Bay Times. He writes editorials and edits the Sunday Perspective section, as well as the daily op-eds and letters to the editor. He worked at the Times since '87, became Perspective Editor in 2006, joined the Editorial Board in 2008, and was promoted to Deputy Editor of Editorials in 2021. Editorials he's written for the Times have been part of the package that was a 2016 finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in Public Service. He states he grew up on a hog, corn, and soybean farm in Illinois, earned a bachelor's from the University of Chicago and a master's from the University of Illinois. He's been working as a journalist for more than 40 years. I've gone back and forth with Jim occasionally with my contributions to the paper, and I really thank him for joining us. And Jim, I'll let you take it from there.
Well, David, thank you. It's an honor to be here and a privilege. Don't get to speak to retired Hillsborough County Medical Association folks very often. Before we start, I got this little thing in my knee. Maybe you could help me with. I'm sure you don't get any of that. I'll start by talking a little bit about what I do, what I'm part of, but I want to throw this open for questions mostly, because I think that's probably where we should go, is for you to ask questions for me to do my best to answer them. But I think it would help to provide a little bit of structure first. So at the Tampa Bay Times, there is a newsroom, which is a news operation. They're supposed to be neutral. They judge the news, print the news, all of that. I'm on the opposite side of that wall. It's a metaphorical wall, but we consider it an actual wall. I'm on the editorial board. There are 6 members of the editorial board, 3 of us who actually write all of the editorials. We are not supposed to be neutral. We are supposed to have points of view. We are the institutional voice of the Tampa Bay Times. What that means in the current cycle is we have recommended candidates in about 40 different contested races in the coming August 23rd primary. It means almost every day we present the institutional view of the Times, whatever that may be. But we also are in charge of the opinion pages. So there are 3 main components to the opinion pages of the Tampa Bay Times. The editorials, which are unsigned institutional views of the Tampa Bay Times. I can talk a little bit later about why they're unsigned. If you'd like to know it, it's pretty straightforward. There are also what are called the op-eds. Those are columns that come from a wide variety of sources, local experts, people we commission to write just for us, and then the so-called syndicates. The Los Angeles Times has pieces we can use. Leonard Pitts comes to us via the Miami Herald, Jonah Goldberg, people like that. So they are actually writing for a syndicate, not just for us. And then there are people that just submit op-eds to us because they are experts on a topic and they want to get their point of view or their expertise or what they know about a subject across to a general readership. The third leg of this stool, and as we all know, 3 points define a plane, so 3 is a good thing, right? Are the letters to the editor. Letters to the editor, as David is well aware, are something our readers care deeply about. We get approximately 13,000 to 14,000 letters a year, and of those, we publish a handful each day. There is no art to what we publish. There's certainly no science to it, so there's no art or science, so what's left? It's a very subjective thing, and we don't pretend to be otherwise. We try to reflect the range of letters that come in. If everybody, like during one of the 2 impeachments, everybody is writing about the impeachment. Well, not every letter we publish is going to be about that, but we're going to publish letters in some way that are commensurate with the volume of letters we're getting on a topic. We also try, although it may not be apparent from what actually ends up in the paper, very hard to publish a range of views across the spectrum in our letters. But that can be difficult because sometimes people are not great at articulating. I know what they're trying to say, but I can't say it for them. They have to say it. We can help the letter along with our editing, but we can't put words in their mouth or on their page. So it can be hard sometimes to reflect, for example, a very conservative point of view if we're not getting many letters that do that, or letters that don't well articulate their point of view. We don't allow ad hominem attacks for the most part. The letter has to be factually accurate, which is another problem. We had one the other day that was going to be critical of people who want to replace the electoral college with the popular vote, but the letter writer was wrong on the number of electoral votes that Biden got versus Trump, was wrong on which states, which candidate carried. And there's a point where you just can't save that letter. And when we get 13 to 14,000 a year, of course, it's hard to winnow them down, but every letter we receive, we do look at. So those are the three components of what the opinion pages are. The editorials, which are the editorial institutional view of the Tampa Bay Times. The op-eds, which are a range of view. And the point of the op-eds is not to echo our own institutional view, it's to offer a wide range of opinion on what the issues of the day are. And our view on this is that any well-argued piece should be in play. We don't have to agree with it. Matter of fact, in many ways, we want to disagree with it. A critical thinking person will always hold his or her ideas up to scrutiny. And if they withstand scrutiny, you can hold them more firmly because they did. If they don't, perhaps one should consider and reconsider one's point of view. And then the letters we've already talked about. On the institutional view of the Times, our main issues, we focus a lot on public education, on the environment, on civil rights, including everything from voting rights to restoring voting rights to free speech. Those are some of our main areas. We also sometimes are very serious. Last week, we were very serious in our editorials about what happened with State Attorney Andrew Warren in Hillsborough, and what happened when sworn law officers stood up beside the governor as he did what he did. And some days we think that satire is the best approach. This morning's editorial, if you've had a chance to read it, you know what that's about. Rather than taking a subject seriously, poking fun at it in a way can sometimes make the point in the best way. But those are the three things we do. There are three of us. It's not some star chamber of dozens of editorial writers. It's three of us who write every editorial that appears on the pages of the Tampa Bay Times. It's one of us who edits the letters to the editor, and it's one of us, that'd be me, who picks almost all the columns and edits almost all accounts for the op-ed page. So we are not sitting in our tweed jackets, smoking our pipe and thinking great thoughts. We're producing opinion pages pretty fast and furiously day in and day out. And a lot of it comes down to, you have to have done it for a while because it has to move quickly. We produce 2 pages every day, except on Wednesdays, plus what we do online. I wish we had more time to be reflective. The nature of it is we have to move quickly to publish opinion pages that we owe our readers. That's about it. As you'll find out, I'm not Stephanie Hayes. She's funny, I'm not. But I'm willing to take all your questions and anything that you have that you'd like to talk about.
Anybody have any questions?
I think a natural is, when COVID first started, there was a lot of alternate opinions that were sort of anti-science, which sort of, I think, makes all of us bristle a little. How do you decide whether something is an alternate view when we consider some of the anti-science sentiment to just be wrong? And you said you don't publish wrong letters, but others would disagree that they weren't wrong. How do you all debate that kind of?
Let me start with a couple of op-eds. So we were in close contact, and I don't think I'm betraying any sources here, with epidemiologists at the University of Florida. They were in a very difficult position in many ways. As you know about the state surgeon general, the one that was and the one that is. And the epidemiologists we worked with had models that would predict, here is what is going to happen with COVID-19 in the state of Florida based on our best knowledge right now. we published that op-ed. We thought it was important enough. We actually published it in what would have been the editorial slot. It was on a Monday. And we showed the track of what had actually happened. I don't remember, I should have looked it up before we started this, if it was the number of infections, number of cases, or the number of deaths. But they had tracked that and projected, and their projection followed exactly what had happened up until that point. And we let them explain why they knew what they did, what mitigation measures worked. Masks actually do work. And to my knowledge, we published no letters that said they don't. That vaccinations did work, do work, if you understand what the efficacy of them is. They're not going to prevent infection. They will make it less likely that you get infected, to make it less likely that you're going to get ill, seriously ill, or die, and things of that sort. So we didn't knowingly publish any wrong information. We did publish a piece or two about the so-called Great Barrington Declaration, simply because that was something that was out there, and we thought people should, when they read about the Great Barrington Declaration, they should know, what is this? What is it asserting? But we certainly didn't stand by what it claimed, that you protect the vulnerable and then somehow herd immunity will fix the pandemic itself, which of course was not true. I don't know if that answers your question. Oh, you're muted. I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Ronald.
I'm sorry. It does to some extent. I guess I was just trying to understand the process by which you decide that something is erroneous when the person writing it would not think it's erroneous. Maybe COVID is not a great example, because to me it's so clear cut. Science is so clear cut. But let's say it's something more like "don't say gay."
Mm-hmm.
In the schools, where there are people who think it's just indoctrinating children, and other people vehemently disagree. What discussion do you have at the newspaper to decide that this is an op-ed worthy of printing, even though you have a substantial number of people who just say it's just flat out wrong science?
Right. Well, science, I think we've covered a little bit that, we are not scientists, but as best we can understand it, we are not going to publish things that are just factually erroneous, that are just in error. If people, well, let's leave the science aside for a second. Let's move on to the don't say gay. We had a really good piece from a teacher and parent at a Pasco school who's married and is gay. And he and his husband were very concerned about their daughter, who is going to be starting kindergarten. And kindergarten through third grade, of course, is what is prohibited under state law from talking about gender and sexual identity. And he was concerned that if their daughter went to school and wanted to talk about her parents, that would be a prohibited discussion. The state law is canny in that, as we all know, it doesn't actually say "don't say gay," but that the reach of that law is the chilling effect it can have on people who are afraid of what they say perhaps not being legal, even though it technically is. And so people won't say things for fear that they'll be in trouble. In some ways, I think that's the pernicious problem with a lot of these laws, that a person who is not necessarily of goodwill can say, well, it doesn't say doesn't prohibit you from doing that. You can do anything you want, you're fine. But the person doesn't feel fine about that. And that column actually addressed that. And here's why I'm concerned, was sort of the point of that. It becomes an issue for us when it's not speech we disagree with. As an editorial board, as I say, we want to publish a wide range of speech. But when it becomes hate speech, that's out of bounds. Or when it becomes speech that's dismissive of people unlike yourselves, that's out of bounds. One of the most difficult things we dealt with are transgender issues, where there are people who honestly think that somehow unisex bathrooms are just a horrible thing, or worse, that transgender boys will want to use the other restroom and that's going to somehow be an issue. They feel that way. They honestly feel that way. Should we let that point of view come across? Yeah, to a certain extent, sure. It's a point of view that people hold. You can have another column that is countervailing and says, well, that's not really what this is about. And even more to the point, I think, are transgender athletes, where Florida wants to ban, and it depends at which level and such. We've had that discussion on the editorial board about, well, what limits should there be, if any? And we've published several pieces, including a long perspective piece by a cross-country runner, if I recall correctly, who ran an NCAA, so a top flight athlete, and why she thought transgender athletes should have to undergo at least a year's worth of hormone therapy before they should be able to compete. That it's a fraught topic, because you've got human rights and civil rights on one side, and you've got some concept of fairness on the other, and there's a middle ground, and that's where these op-eds, that's where the talk should be, is where do we find a balance here? And I think you get there by publishing pieces that sort of poke at, well, my issue with this is here, well, my issue with this is here, but people have to be fair-minded and open-minded. And with any luck, the op-eds we publish will help on that. They may not in all cases.
Jim, I've got two things to ask you. One, since you've been doing this for a while, and I was talking to Elka about this yesterday, when did we reach the point where things became black and white for two different sides, so partisan? Like you talked, you've got to reach a 50-50 point in give and take. And I don't remember politics in the old days, I was in med school and practice and everything, but we seem to get things done. Now it doesn't matter what happens. 50 senators say yes, 50 senators say no. They've got to be smart, intelligent people, but they look at things so differently. And again, without getting into politics, this whole thing with Trump and McCarthy, McConnell, Graham, after January 6th said, condemned Trump. And then 2 weeks later, they're all buddies again. And I don't know how they, how they change, and how we've got in reading the editorials and reading the letters is just so divisive, and nobody wants to compromise. And I mean, people are changed over. There are some Republicans who think like Democrats a little bit, and some go the other way, Manchin and Sinema and stuff. But when did we reach a point that it was so divisive? Am I making my question?
Sure. Well, let me start by offering a ray of hope. This coming Sunday's Perspective has two major essays, one by a rising senior at USF on the marketplace of ideas and how you can create the ability for people to talk productively and constructively, coming from very different points of view. So I found hope in that. And there's also a piece in the Wall Street Journal talking, an interview with the former head of the ACLU about exactly that point, David, which is, how did we go from free speech and civil liberties, civil liberty in the sense of being free to live your life without fear of, oppression, that those used to be matched up things, that you could express yourself, and it also made you a freer person. Now we sort of have, well, if you express yourself, free expression in some circles is seen as a tool of the powerful against the weak instead of a tool that the weak can use to assert themselves against the powerful. And that's a change. But her point was, and she, worked for the ACLU for decades, is that we can get that back. But to your question, when did this happen? Well, there's been a lot written about that, and I'm no expert. But ironically, it may have started with the end of the Fairness Doctrine in 1987. As you recall, the Fairness Doctrine said that any commercial TV or radio station that used the airwaves, because remember, that's a public thing. They're not owned by anyone. They're owned by all of us, had to be fair in its presentation of commentary. And that, in some ways, put up guardrails for good or ill on what people would or would not allow on a radio station. And Rush Limbaugh was not really on the radio in a meaningful sense until the Fairness Doctrine was revoked. And it meant that the major TV stations, networks were somewhat cautious. It also meant there was kind of a homogenization of news. If you watched, there were only three back then. It was ABC, NBC, and CBS. You watched the evening news, it was more which newscaster you liked than whether you wanted a liberal point of view or a conservative point of view. It was just sort of the view. The news judgment didn't vary that much. Now you can say that's not a great thing because news judgment by its nature is subjective, but it seemed to get us through okay. Now we're in a place where you can find your own bubble, as we all know. On Facebook, on Twitter, wherever, on MSNBC or on Fox, you can find views that accord with your own and don't challenge your own. And that's a part of the problem, because an echo chamber is just that. It echoes, and it echoes ever louder because you are not hearing opposing points of view. You're not hearing something that challenges your thinking. And I'm not saying this is a conservative or progressive thing. It's a thing. And that ends up driving things to the extremes instead of finding something to compromise on in the middle. I still believe that most of America is more in the middle than not. I have to believe that. But one would not know that from conversations on Facebook or columns or watching MSNBC or Fox at night when it's the opinion side of it. I don't know what the answer is, because part of the thing is we believe in liberal democracy. I don't mean liberal in the capital L sense. I mean liberal in the English, that it's a free market. It's a large marketplace of ideas. And the way that you push out a bad idea is by contesting it with a better idea. And I'm afraid that marketplace has shrunk so that you don't hear those good ideas that don't already accord with your point of view. I'm not sure how we change that. In some ways, a newspaper like the Tampa Bay Times is one of the last sort of moderating influences in some ways, because we appeal to a geographic audience, and the Tampa Bay area is pretty much 50-50. So we can't, even if we wanted to philosophically, we couldn't say, well, we're going to be strictly a progressive paper or strictly a conservative paper. I mean, our editorial board obviously leans slightly left of center. Some would say far left of center. Others would say we're not left enough. But we're not going to be so far left of center that we're not in any way in accord with our larger communities' values and views. We hope we can lead them, but we're not going to be off of their radar screen altogether. And in some ways, that's the hope, is that mid-range news organizations, which are more geographically based than ideologically based, we have to respect the interests of our audience. And that actually helps us to moderate our views.
Okay, you said today's editorial was, you were trying to make a point with sarcasm. It almost was in the realm of Dan Ruth, I think, to be honest with you. But do you ever get letters that you look at and you go, this letter is crazy, or this letter is really way out there, but it isn't ugly, it isn't nasty, but we're just going to print it and see if we get responses from it and stuff like that.
Sure. There was an example the other day. Now, I won't name him, but it was a letter writer who sends us many, many letters, and apparently has not found the caps key on his keyboard, because the letters either come in all caps or all lowercase, but that's neither here nor there. And he was making a point about the killing of Al-Qaeda's #1, and basically said, well, Joe Biden finally got something right. So there are 3 points to the letter. Everything after the first sentence was factually wrong. And so we had to fix the facts in the letter, even though the point didn't change. And we published that letter because it was from a conservative who wanted to say Joe Biden finally got something right. But let's not forget, he was wrong on Osama bin Laden, and he was wrong in the failed, actually it was not a failed drone strike, it was a drone strike that killed a family. But he had the particulars of both of those wrong. He said, for example, the Osama bin Laden raid that Biden did not want to kill bin Laden. Well, it's much more nuanced than that. When they went around the room for the specific strike in mind, he said, we need more information. Let's wait a day. That's what he said. And so we're not going to publish a letter that's just factually in error if we know that. In this case, we happen to know it because we have PolitiFact on our side. So we were able to go back and check the record on that. But the point of publishing that letter was to get a point of view across. We don't see that often. Somebody said, well, Biden actually got this little thing right, but look at all these other things he got wrong in the letter writer's view. But we had to fix the factual errors in the letter. I don't know if that answers your question, but we will publish letters like that after we corrected the errors, and then if that makes sense.
I hope none of mine are like that. I've got one other point, and then if anybody has anything, I emailed you about this the other day, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I still have concerns over it. And that was about one of the judges' races that you explained that you recommended this judge, but recommendation doesn't mean an endorsement.
Right.
It was the Black Jacobs race, and a video came out where Black and his wife were condemning Jacobs, using anti-Semitic comments, just being really way out on the right, religious, God's going to do this. And somebody sent me something and made me open my eyes because I hadn't seen this before. And then I contacted you about it, and you said that you guys would not change your recommendation, although you were aware of it. What do you do in a case like that? I mean,
Sure.
What do you look at?
Well, let me start by distinguishing between a recommendation and an endorsement. And this is a good case why it's a recommendation. Voters will have to choose between the available candidates in every single race in which they vote. So we never fail to recommend in a contested race in which we've interviewed. Our thinking is that voters will have to make a choice, so we need to make a recommendation. An endorsement, which we don't do, would imply we are foursquare behind this candidate. A recommendation is simply a recommendation that among the candidates in this race, for reasons most of which we will cover in a recommendation editorial, we believe this is the better candidate for this job at this time. There is a lot more to a recommendation than simply a litmus test on, in this case, abortion. Keep in mind, the girl did get an abortion in the end. That he didn't refuse her, it went to a higher court. Now, I'll talk about this, and there's an editorial coming eventually on another aspect of this. The editorial board, in making a recommendation, interviews every candidate who agrees to be interviewed. So that's a part of the process. We do background checks. We look at the body of work. We interview as many relevant people as we can. And I'm I'm not at liberty to talk about the specific judges and lawyers we interviewed, but there were a lot of them. And they were across the spectrum politically. That helped to inform our view. So obviously, we think he was in error in what he did in this case. In the video, and I think I can say this, it was his wife, okay? It would have been good had he found a way to make her stop talking. But it was his wife. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. If you read the recommendation, you'll see some recommendations are very much, we really, really recommend this person. And others have sort of the tenor of, okay, we're picking somebody in this race to recommend. There are lots of questions, lots of issues, and we'll lay those out so readers can come to their own conclusions. We are not saying you should vote for this person. We're saying we recommend everything we have done, all of our backgrounding, all of our record checking, all of our looking at the files and the court rulings. We recommend this person. We understand why others may go a different way. Not sure, David, if that answers your question.
No, I think you covered it well. And as I remember when the write-up was in the paper, that it wasn't a strong recommendation. It was kind of like, this is the, either way, and this guy has a few issues, but we recommend.
Well, and the other thing we tend to do in a recommendation is talk more about the person we're recommending rather than the perceived flaws in the challenger, of which there can be some. But let me talk for just a second about the other aspect of this, which is what we don't know. The nature of state law is that his ruling in this particular case, it has everyone up in arms, was not public. Parts of it became public because the appellate court quoted them, which is why we were able to see them, why anyone who has access to the public record was able to see them. We know there have been, I think it was 3 cases that had gone up on appeal. He's not overturned very often. And we think the state law should be changed. We would like to see these opinions. They could be redacted. There is no danger to the juvenile in question that she is somehow going to be publicly outed. We're not going to know who she is. We would certainly like to know more of the particulars of the case, not just the parts that the appellate court quoted in its overturning of his decision. And I think we all, not just editorial writers, but all public citizens in Florida have a right to see those, and we'd be able to come to a much more reasoned judgment if we saw the decisions, not just parts that were excerpted by the appellate court. But that's an actual editorial for another day, which I think we will be writing. David, you're muted.
I think what you mentioned and what scared me is that his wife was doing most of the talking. And that kind of bothered me. And it wasn't maybe what he's done and where the 2 candidates have been, but if he wins, what influence is this woman going to have over her husband?
Well, let's take that up a notch and look at Clarence and Ginny Thomas. One can argue it's not fair to hang some of Ginny Thomas's association's opinions and the like on the Supreme Court justice. In my view, it becomes fair when she is an active player in organizations that have business before that very court. So that one, in terms of our commentary and op-eds we publish about Ginny Thomas's role in some of these things, particularly on abortion, are fair. I candidly don't know enough about the judge's wife and her involvement to know what influence she would have. And we are in an era where appropriately, we are all independent agents, that we are not held to our spouses or our significant others' views, however progressive, conservative, noxious, or lovely they are not our own views, unless we take them as our own. And so we have to be very careful not to ascribe to a candidate the views of somebody close to that person. Now, we're all judged by the company we keep, right? We were taught that when we were children. But we have to look beyond that until we know there are reasons to be concerned. And here, I don't know enough yet. I don't know.
Are you familiar with the Week, the magazine, The Week? Do you read
Yes.
that at all? Or is anybody else? Does anybody read the? Yeah, good. It's a very fair, I think, magazine. It comes out usually every Friday if you get it on time, and they're very up to date. But they'll present both sides, right, left, middle, on opinions and editorials. And if you're not familiar with it, you should look into it, because it's a very good magazine, except no sports section, but what are you going to do? Any other questions for Jim? Ron?
Not sure it's a question, but it goes back to the election. And I thought it was curious. I have a lot of friends who are Nikki Fried supporters. So I was kind of curious what you all thought. And, you know, you didn't have anything bad to say about Nikki Fried, but you still chose Christ because strategically he seemed to be better poised to win against a Republican. And I guess I was a little surprised. I thought, I thought they would have chosen whoever they thought the best candidate was without thinking strategically that far ahead. It just surprised me. So I still didn't come away from reading it knowing whether you all really like Nikki Fried better than Chris or not.
I can't betray the confidence of our editorial board meetings in one like this, but we were close. I can say that. I may even allow that at least one member of the board may have voted differently than we recommended. I don't know, maybe. Yeah, this wasn't so much a strategic decision. We were looking for the best candidate. We view the Democrat as somebody who needs to defeat Ron DeSantis in November, period, full stop. As this morning's editorial, I think, probably made clear. And we think Christ is the better candidate to do that. I could go on a bit. You know, it is true that Fried is the only Democrat elected to statewide office. She is in the cabinet. We met personally with, I mean, my heavens, Charlie, we've met him over the years. I can't tell you how many times he's come to the edit board. Nikki Fried came in and we interviewed her in person. She was impressive. I think they're both fine candidates. We had to make a choice on which to recommend. And it wasn't just strategic, who has the better chance of winning. It was more, who do we really think is the best candidate? And that's a matrix of things. And it was a reasonably close call, but we came down on the side of Christ.
Don, unmute yourself.
Sir, you may have answered this and I just missed it. How would you describe your Hillsborough County, I mean, just politically and intellectually?
We should have one of our other editorial board members here, John Hill. He is the expert on Tampa and Hillsborough. Grew up, went through the whole school system. His parents still live, you know, all his relatives still live there. He would be the one to answer that. When we write about Tampa and Hillsborough, he's the guy who does it. So I'm not dodging the question so much as.
Well, he's not here. So what is your opinion?
My opinion is Tampa is a progressive city. Eastern Hillsborough is a changing place. And we will see how that shakes out with new congressional districts in November. District 13 among them. There's a tension between rural Hillsborough and the city of Tampa. You see that play out in transportation referenda. You know, do we want roads? Do we want mass transit? What do we want? You see that play out sometimes in who gets what in terms of development and such. You see that play out sometimes in policing during COVID, you know, different policies at the county and at the state level. And of course, the state, excuse me, the county and the city level. And of course, the state sort of trumped all that soon enough.
Bad choice of words.
Can't help myself sometimes. But I am not an expert on Hillsborough and Tampa. That's John. And so those are sort of my observations from just having, well, I've lived in the area for 35 years, so it's not nothing but much more Pinellas and St. Pete.
Well, I've appreciated having you here. You're very impressive and you represent the Times well.
Well, thank you.
Jim, what? Oh, Aaron, go ahead.
Well, this is a little bit different from the editorial question, but I wonder if you would give us your opinion about whether a physical newspaper can survive in the current era.
That depends a lot on the market. When I started in journalism, well, more than 40 years ago, newspapers were what there were. You know, if you were a print journalist, that meant you worked for a newspaper that delivered 7 days a week, or the one I started at 6 days a week. We have been behind the curve. When I say we, I mean sort of the print newspaper industry at every turn for decades. You know, we didn't see the internet in time. When the recession in 2008 happened, we wondered, is this a structural change, or is just a recession will come out and everything will be the same? You know, it's been only in the last few years where we've segmented into New York Times, the Washington Post, and a Wall Street Journal, and to a lesser extent, Los Angeles Times, that are able to make a very profitable go of it as digital first entities. People don't realize that about the New York Times. It is a digital news organization now that happens to print a newspaper. At the smallest markets, weeklies and some smaller dailies are able to make a go of it with print newspapers because the distribution costs are relatively low. The market is contained. They don't have to distribute that paper over a very broad area. And they are so local that they're the only source of news, of community news for that community. We, as a mid-major newspaper, we're the largest news organization in the Southeast. It's a tough spot to be in because we have to transition. As you know, during the pandemic, we went from printing an actual physical newspaper 7 days a week to printing on Wednesday and on Sunday. I'm not disclosing any state secrets here. Sunday, we make money. A Sunday newspaper is still a profitable thing to print and distribute. Wednesdays, we also make money. Thank you, Publix. It's the day the grocery ads come out. So for a market like ours, and a news organization like ours, we can still make money printing a physical newspaper, but right now, only on 2 days of the week. And I'm not on the business side, but I don't expect that to change. I think we're pretty much where we're going to be, printing an actual newspaper on Wednesdays and Sundays, printing an e-newspaper every day of the week, which we can update, and then having our own website. So in short, you have a couple of the massive daily news operations, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, that can make a go of it almost as a pure digital news organization. They happen to print a paper. Small local news organizations do well, or can do well. Mid ones like ours, we need to find our way. We are still geographically based, in the Tampa Bay area, largely of 3.1, 3.2 million people. But we print an e-newspaper 5 days a week and a print newspaper. Well, we print the e-newspaper all 7, but we print an actual newspaper 2 days a week, and plus our website. We will continue to have more digital subscribers. The model has changed. When I was a kid, when I was growing up in newspapers, classified advertising was a huge chunk of our revenue. Well, that's mostly gone now. Thank you, Angie's List. Display advertising also used to be a huge chunk. Remember the days of cell phones when all the major companies were trying to get everybody to buy a cell phone? We had these full page ads. Full page ads in those days was 17, 18,000 a pop. Those are pretty much gone. So what's left? Subscribers. The people who actually read the news are the ones who now have to pay for it. And that's fair, obviously, but people will look at it and say, wait a minute, I'm paying more and it feels like I'm getting less. Most, in my view, of people who feel that way don't really take advantage of all the digital resources we have. They look only at the print. We have some people who read only the print paper that will never go online. They'll never look at the newspaper. And I feel for them, but that's where we are. We're not going to print papers other days of the week unless we can actually make money. We've come back with a Thursday paper. If it made money, it doesn't. Same thing with the Tuesday paper. If it made money, we'd print it. It doesn't. I don't know if that answers your question, but an actual physical print newspaper seems to me viable only in a community where it's a very small paper and distributes to a very small area, or the hybrid model we have when we distribute that print newspaper on days when we can make money doing so.
Jim, when you went digital, I didn't think I would like it, but I find it very comforting to sit here on a computer, cup of coffee, not get ink on my hands, not have to sneeze because I might be allergic to the ink. So I like it. I didn't think I would, but I do like it.
Well, I'll tell you the things I found as a reader, not as an editor, is I can read it more easily. My eyes, I'm hoping we can all share this, my eyes aren't what they used to be. And the literal print, I'm working at it like this because, it's a slightly smaller size newspaper than it was. It's hard for me to read it. And on the screen, I can just make it whatever size I want. Other advantages, it's portable. You have an iPad or its equivalent. It's with you wherever you go. The URLs, like when we publish the recommendations, like them or not, they're there pretty much every day. But if you actually want to see the full recommendation and you're reading it in the e-newspaper, you can actually just click on the URL. It takes you right to it. You don't have to write anything down. You don't have to go separately and look it up on the web. It's right there. So there are a lot of advantages, and we can update them. The e-newspaper doesn't have the deadline that a print newspaper does. So if you read the Wednesday print, or some cases the Sunday print, and then go to the e-newspaper, you'll get later news. You'll get updated news because we can just refresh those pages and send them out at no cost. The electrons are all but free. And so it's actually much more up to date. And that's at the same time, our print deadlines are so much earlier than they used to be. There's really a chasm between getting the latest news in e-newspaper and what we actually print on the print days because the print deadlines have moved up. For example, the Sunday Perspective section is already printed. They printed last night.
Well, they print in Lakeland now, so it's got to be. It's going to be. Yeah. I have 2 quick questions.
Sure.
Who is in charge of choosing the editorial cartoons of the day? And I know you made a comment in columns. I don't know you particularly, but the editorial board about the situation with the police chiefs standing behind DeSantis. I kind of like if a police department endorses a candidate, gives you an idea of who the police like, but seeing them stand there and now seeing the commercials against Demings with the chiefs condemning Demings for voting with Pelosi, well, there's probably not many Republicans who haven't voted with McConnell every time. So, or McCarthy. So what's the editorial board view or your view towards physically seeing police in the position they're in? And again, who picks the editorial cartoons?
Right. Well, we spoke specifically to law enforcement's presence behind the governor when he suspended Andrew Warren. We thought that was improper because it was using the office of law enforcement, which should be neutral, for what in our view is a political purpose. To my knowledge, that's the only editorial view we've taken on that. Personally, I want my police officers to be neutral. I don't care if they're Republican or Democrat, just don't tell me. Just enforce the law, keep me safe. That's my personal view. The editorial cartoons are usually picked by Graham Brink, who's my boss. He's the editor of editorials. When he's out, I pick them. And it's sort of funny because they are among our most popular things. I mean, we'll pull what little hair we have out sometimes because we work so hard on this editorial, so much reporting, so much thought. And the most read thing on the web was the editorial cartoons. Well, you'll take it where you can get it. We've actually in recent weeks expanded. The Washington Post, where we used to get most of our editorial cartoons from through their syndicate, quit being in the business. And so we looked at other options, and there's this wonderful cartoon source called Kaggle. And it's just a syndicate, a composium of scores, maybe hundreds of cartoonists around the world. And now we have access to all of them. So it's a freshening of the sort of the points of view. In cartoons, I should actually mention this at the outset. I talked about the institutional view of the Times in the editorials, the op-eds, which are the columns, which we hope represent a spectrum of views, and the letters to the editor, which represent views of our readership. The editorial cartoons are actually the fourth part of that, and very much an important part because humor is often the way people actually get a point across. And editorial cartoons are not supposed to be fair. I think sometimes readers miss that. They'll see a cartoon and I love that. Well, you love it because it made fun of the people you don't like or the policies you don't like. When it's the other way around, I mean, trying to remember, it was actually a cartoon I picked. My boss is on vacation visiting his elderly folks in Canada. They got COVID, by the way, that's here there. One of the cartoons I picked came in for a lot of criticism from letters. To be honest, I don't remember. It was a conservative cartoon and people thought, that's just unfair. And well, in some way, that's kind of the point. You know, the cartoonist is not playing fair. You know, they shouldn't be factually wrong, but they could certainly stretch things. And it's a cartoon. It's supposed to be funny, and not all of them are going to be funny depending on where your politics lay. But they are supposed to be something that takes you away from, you know, the Sturm und Drang of everyday sort of puzzling through things. And it's just supposed to be fun to look at. I mean, you can imagine all the letters we get about Doonesbury, which we had nothing to do with. That's in the actual comics section. But a lot of people say this should be in the editorial page if it's anywhere because they're so political. Yeah, I guess.
Any final question? Jim, this has been a great hour. I've appreciated it. Loved it. So I want to thank you again for coming. You may not be as funny as Stephanie Hayes. You're true. No. That's true. But you know, you hold your own. We actually had Stephanie and Mark. So we've had Times well represented here. Anyone else? Final thoughts to Jim? All right, Jim, you may sign out.
I wanted to say one last thing, which is that keep in mind, I'm on the editorial side. So we have opinions and we are not scared of sharing them. The news side is a completely separate operation. There's a figurative, not a literal, but a figurative wall between us. So if you're unhappy with something the news side did, not us. If you're unhappy with what the editorial side did, that is us. Don't bother them with complaints. That's on us. Everybody reports to Conan Gallady, who's the head of the company, and he sits on the editorial board. But the editorial board goes up here, reports to Conan. The news side goes up here, reports to Conan. We don't report to each other at all. We're completely separate operations.
Okay. Now that we understand that, I have an idea for a little op-ed that I want to send to you. See what you think. But
Well,
nothing.
I'm just gonna say
Go
thanks
ahead.
for having me. It's a lot of fun to get to talk to thoughtful, intelligent people.
Thank you. And I'll say thank you for all of us. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jim.
All righty. Take care now.
All right. Anybody else want to